Welcome. This is Hudson Institute's Deep Dive from both Jerusalem and Washington, D.C. And in today's edition, we will focus primarily on the latest announcement by the Islamic Republic of Iran that it rejects the latest proposal by U.S. Special Envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff. What does that mean? Also, the IAEA is holding its periodic Board of Governors meeting with a lot of condemning reports of Iran's nuclear aspirations and activities, hand in hand. But before all that, we will now turn to introduce our experts for today, to include Ms. Mary Kissel, who is a senior fellow at Hudson Institute, formerly a senior advisor at State Department to the former Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, and currently she also serves as the Executive Vice President and Senior Policy Advisor at Stevens. It's great to see you, Mary. Also, next to Mary, we have Dr. Uzi Arad, who formerly served as Israel's National Security Advisor, as well as a Mossad Division Chief. A few years back, also a senior researcher at Hudson Institute during the Herman Kahn days. Next, we have Dr. Olli Heinonen, who formerly served as the Deputy Director General for the International Atomic Energy Agency, currently a distinguished fellow at Stimson Center in Washington, D.C., and last but not least, Brigadier General in Reserve Dr. Amnon Sofrin, formerly the Chief of Intelligence at Mossad, as well as a Senior IDF Intelligence Directorate Officer. And with no further ado, I'd like to turn to you, Ms. Kissel, when we're talking about the Iranian rejection of the latest proposal by the Trump administration. The rejection actually comes down to matters related to enrichment and, of course, also causality out of there. President Trump was quite adamant about the fact that there is going to be zero enrichment and that the consequences, if Iran were to reject those, are going to be dire.
Thanks, Jonathan. It's wonderful to join you on Deep Dive with this distinguished panel today. Clearly, the Iranian behavior is consistent with decades of negotiations under both Republican and Democrat administrations. And President Trump demonstrated in his first term that he is acutely aware that Tehran is the problem in the Middle East, is the world's largest state sponsor of terrorism, and that they cannot, as you say, have any enrichment capacity. And I would expect him to stick to that. On the other side, Jonathan, it is his second term, and he's looking for a political legacy. And that's why I think you see this outreach for deal making and peacemaking. But as I think we all know on this panel, that's simply impossible with the regime that is in power today. So, as you say, I expect that the president would continue his maximum pressure campaign. Recall in the first term that we took Iranian oil exports down dramatically, depriving the regime of tens of billions of dollars for their terrorism campaigns across the Middle East and the rest of the world. I would expect that to continue. I would expect significant diplomatic coordination in international organizations to punish Iran, especially at the UN. Recall, too, that we were unable to snap back sanctions at the UN with our partners in Europe. That was a disappointment, obviously. I would expect those efforts to be renewed. And then, of course, there's the big lever of secondary sanctions on Iran, which are very powerful, where we punish companies that do business with Iranian entities. In the first term, the president gave carve-outs to several countries, including China and India, but that's another lever that he could pull.
Thank you, Mary. Dr. Heinonen, I'd like to immediately turn to you with regard to the Board of Governors meeting currently underway in Austria. When we're talking about the latest reports, they were very condemning. Naturally, we already discussed this in one of our panels here together, but nonetheless, for our broad viewership right now on this deep dive through Hudson Institute, if you could articulate the ins and outs of the latest IAEA reports? What are the key ingredients that should be focused on, and to what degree should we be alarmed, as the report essentially suggests?
Thank you. We really should be alarmed on those findings. But I would like also to remind the people that when IAEA wrote this report, it focused only on certain items, in particular Iran's compliance with its NPT safeguards agreement, and focusing on that, the stocks of the nuclear material, because this findings show to the public that there might be some undeclared nuclear material and facilities in Iran that has been discussed now several years in a row, and Iran has not been forthcoming in answers. This is the first point I make, and this is a severe thing because this actually warrants transferring the file for consideration to the UN Security Council. But at the same time, having been there and reading this for the years, this is not all the information IAEA has. They are not explaining every tiny small detail what they know about Iran's nuclear program. And I draw your attention to a couple of things. Mr. Grossi said in his opening remarks this morning, that Monday morning, that there are some other facilities in Iran, but he didn't mention it. And I think that these are the things which IAEA will use in the discussions to find out when they go to the negotiation, how forthcoming Iran is at this point of time. And then if we go back to this dossier which Israel picked up from Tehran and distributed it to the IAEA and others, there are quite a few places there mentioned in that dossier which has never visited by IAEA. At least they have not shown it in their reports. So there are a lot of other things which still needs to be done, and it will be interesting whether Iran will comply with those findings. But the focus is at this point of time nuclear material and activities which point to the possible nuclear weapons development. And then last but not the least, many of those items IAEA started to study in late 2003, when we get to the procurement habits of the Physics Research Center, etc. And they have been under continuous scrutiny since then. And still, as of today, IAEA has not seen all that equipment which it's asked to see in 2004 and 2003. It has not got answers and has not got all to the places which those equipment were at that time. So it will be now interesting in the IAEA Board of Governors, what will be the answer from the board? Board certainly doesn't, it can most likely will report this is non-compliance of the safeguards obligations, and then this dossier goes to the UN. But that is in the UN Security Council another story, how this will be handled, and whether the snapback will come at this point of time or at the later date.
Indeed. Well, Dr. Arad, I'd like to ask you, since following the opening remarks by the Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, Rafael Grossi, he provided a brief press briefing to reporters, during the course of which he essentially highlighted, vis-a-vis the reports that were published and circulated amongst the members of the Board of Governors, that the structure of the weapons program that Iran held until 2003 was actually a structured, coordinated weapons relevant program, as they defined it. And subsequent to that, there was a sort of a less coordinated individual efforts that could have been weapons relevant. To that, he responded by saying, yes, in general terms, that is in effect the case. But nonetheless, there is not enough elements or proof in order to provide a broad structured program that would essentially characterize Iran's nuclear aspirations as such. But nonetheless, there is a concrete reference here to Iran pursuing nuclear weapons capabilities in one form or another in separate directions, and that should be very alarming to us.
What we know, of course, is alarming, and as it should be. But let us not forget that neither the head of the IAEA nor the Israeli government is making public all that it knows about Iranian activities and plans and programs. In fact, the Israeli government is quite, how should I say, reserved in the detail that it provides about what it probably knows on the basis of authoritative sources and so forth to be the real situation on the ground in the various facilities. Some of those mentioned, some of those even discussed before, some of them even visited in those few Israeli visits above Iran, and some of them probably also known by the intelligence system, which is used for their own purposes, but are not public. That means that the relative gravity of the situation is well known, I think, to the Israeli government. And on the basis of that, it pursues its current policy of asking for very effective action, employing all levers of influence, be it the direct instruments of pressure and sanctions, or even more direct and effective kind of action to curtail that program.
Thank you, Dr. Arad. Amnon, General, I'd like to ask you specifically about an Iranian ploy right now where it claims to have attained new material related to Israel's nuclear program, and that it is going to make this dramatic announcement similar to the one that Prime Minister Netanyahu made several years back with regard to the Ahmad program archive that was retrieved from Tehran. But when asked about this, IAEA Director General Grossi actually put quite the chilling water on it, and he said as follows, this seems to refer to SOEC, which is a research facility, which we inspect, by the way. Normally people tell me, you don't inspect Israel. Yes, we do. This, of course, is quite interesting, the fact that they do have some type of data with regard to now a civilian program that the IAEA has access to. What type of message does this send to Iran and the international community that has been trying to scrutinize Israel for so many years? And naturally, the Iranians are trying to divert attention elsewhere from their own aspirations.
First of all, let us remind all that we are not signed, Israel didn't sign the NPT so far. That means that the part that is exposed to the IAEA is what we call a civilian plan. And this is, of course, open to inspection and everything else. And this is a very known place. It's not hidden, it's not secret. And I think that there's no damage to Israel, the fact that somebody is inspecting it. Now, the message is that Israel is under inspection, just like the other countries. This is a message for Iran. On the other side, I don't really believe that the Iranians did succeed in penetrating so deep into the Israeli archives and to draw out materials that point out about Israel nuclear activity, just like the claim. I think that in a way they are bluffing to try to shade Israel, and not only Iran will be under inspection or in the focus. And I don't really believe that this is true, and I doubt it very, very deeply.
Thank you, General Sofrin. Ms. Kissel, I'd like to zoom out a little bit and look at the various geostrategic complexities that may emanate out of Iran's seeming aspirations to break out, point in time yet unknown, but nonetheless, what should we broaden our horizon towards?
Well, I can speak from my perspective here in the United States, Jonathan. We are facing a threat unlike anything we've seen in the last half century with not just from Iran, but from a consortium of authoritarian states, Iran, Russia, China, North Korea, working together, trading intelligence, trading goods and services, bolstering each other, coordinating their activities. And so I think what happens in the Middle East has to be seen in that context, that there's simply not just a bilateral issue between Washington and Tehran, but this, as you say, larger geostrategic picture. Just in these last hours, a Chinese aircraft carrier sailed beyond the second island chain. That's the first time we've ever seen that, just to give your viewership an example of how much the situation has changed. As regards the Middle East, clearly shipment up into the Mediterranean is very important. We saw insurance rates spike after the Houthi attack. Our cargo ships suddenly had to take different routes. There was a deep disruption there. Of course, the energy supply and the impact on commodity markets is significant. But thirdly, Israel's our great friend in the Middle East, the region's only stable, vibrant, vigorous democracy. We share common interests. And I think President Trump, again, in the first term, deeply understood that the Abraham Accords that he forged, one of his great legacies, would not have been possible without the maximum pressure campaign on Iran to give the members of the Abraham Accords that security, that confidence that they could make an outreach to Israel in a significant way. And so, many factors here about why global markets and the United States as a nation care about what happens in the Middle East. But as you say, it's very important to put this in the larger context of the cooperation of states that do not share our values, do not share our strategic interests, and are actively working together to thwart everything that we hold dear in the West.
Thank you, Ms. Kissel. Dr. Heinonen, I'd like to hear your take on that, also from a geostrategic level, since the Russians and the Chinese are heavily involved when it comes to Iran's nuclear program. To what degree does that impair a certain diplomatic solution, considering the sheer interests in both Moscow and Beijing vis-a-vis Tehran? That is one leg to that question. And the second leg, to what degree is the fact that right now in the UN Security Council, we have Guyana, the next one is going to be Pakistan, then Panama, and then Russia, is impacting that sequence in order to ensure that the deliberations on snapback, which would then reintroduce prior UN Security Council resolutions that would also enforce a zero enrichment for the Iranians, would actually be viable?
Thank you. Russia has a trouble here. We know that they have construction projects in several countries in the Middle East, Southeast Asia, and in Iran. And Russia is today not a Soviet Union. Its nuclear production capabilities, equipment, materials, very often are imported to Russia, modified, and then installed, for example, to Bushehr. So these sanctions which are over there, they block it for the time being. And we have seen, I think, already some delays in Turkey and in Bangladesh in the projects. I don't know how it goes in Egypt. So they have a problem. And similarly, perhaps to lesser degree, has China problem with its aspirations to export nuclear power plants and particularly small reactors, which they claim are efficient, and many countries, particularly in Africa, may like to have them. So this is from that point of view, context, and I think that there both the snapback and secondary sanctions have a tremendous impact on the projects in short term in those countries which I mentioned. I think that's one thing. Then when it comes to the Security Council, I think it would be very difficult for Security Council not to take up the Iran dossier when it goes from the IAEA most likely by the end of this week for information. This is the tradition, it will be discussed. And now snapback is for the first time in real test, because these three countries can snap it back, particularly UK and France, who are permanent members of the UN Security Council. But I wouldn't be surprised. It depends now how these negotiations with the US proceed, US-Iran negotiations. that whether they want to buy a little bit more time for the negotiations and follow the practice, which was, for example, with North Korea in 1993, when the IAEA submitted the resolution there, then Security Council talked about it, and then they gave another opportunity for North Korea to rectify the situation, which it didn't do. But I think I could well see that there will be a couple of rounds before we get really to the actual snapback.
Dr. Arad, Ismail Baghei, Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesman, earlier today said as follows: the U.S. proposal lacked such specifics and was not the outcome of the previous 4 or 5 rounds of negotiations. We will soon present our own proposed plan once finalized to the other side through Oman. Our plan is reasonable, logical, and balanced, and we strongly recommend that the American side seize this opportunity. It is certainly in the United States' interest to take this proposal seriously and consider it carefully. It seems to me like a veiled threat. What are we to take out of that?
Well, I don't know what is the veiled threat. You see here an Iranian strategy to try to avoid responding or reacting constructively to what is expected of them. Since what is expected can be learned either from what has been referred to as problematic by the IAEA or by the proposals and essentially demands placed by the Americans in the bilateral negotiations, they're trying to hedge against that. They don't want to come to a head of that. And this process that Ollie referred to is exactly the kind of route that is lying ahead. We, therefore, should not expect an early confrontation on the issues, but a slow progression. Whether that progression is towards something which would be mutually acceptable, I would not be surprised if this happens under further pressure. But it might come also to a possibility that it does not yield some kind of a compromise, in which what should follow is precisely what Ms. Kissel said, is a greater exertion of pressure, which would, in a way, be a policy to coerce Iran to comply, to coerce it to do what is being asked, or else. And then the party that should feel threatened is Iran.
Indeed. Well, General Sofrian, I'd like to point out that Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, over the weekend, actually, at the end of last week, came out and stated that they will not accept zero enrichment, to which President Trump said as follows: they won't be enriching. If they enrich, then we're going to have to do it the other way, and I really don't want it to go the other way. It seems like there is here a disconnect between the two sides, and at the same time, as also Ms. Kissel said at the beginning, President Trump seeks the deal. He doesn't seek to really go for the kinetic response. What are we to expect, though, from a breakdown? Is it truly going to exacerbate or escalate the maximum pressure campaign, or will we ultimately see the timeline run out to a point of no return?
I think that both sides don't want to go into a large-scale war. None of them. Not the Americans on one end and not the Iranians on the second end. That means that, first of all, Iran is insisting on enriching uranium on the Iranian soil. And this is a provision that they pose right now. But of course, it's negotiable. Everything can be to get into some compromise. That means that the American don't want, the US administration doesn't want to go into a large-scale war. It prefers to go into negotiations and to get to some mutual agreement that will enable Iran to keep some of its capabilities, but not to endanger the whole issue and not to get to the capability of what we call building up an atomic device. On the other hand, the Iranians are dragging time, and they know that as long as negotiations are going on, nobody is going to attack them. So at least they hope. I'm not sure that this is true, but this is what they believe. And they will go on insisting. This is what we call, we define it as what we call the bazaar, the Iranian bazaar. That means that they know how to drag time, they know how to negotiate, they know how to lead their own will to be in some way accepted. And that's the whole issue. Now, I don't believe that the Iranians want to go into a dead end and to get and to risk an American or an Israeli attack or mutual attack of both sides. On the other hand, the Americans don't want to go into a war right now. They still have a leverage to go over the Iranians. And the fact that Iran refused or rejected the proposal doesn't mean that this is a dead end. It's an ongoing discussion and it will go on.
Indeed. Well, we're drawing near to the end of the program, and we'll have only time for one closing statement, which Ms. Gissel will have the honor of giving. But I will point out that there was a deadline set. So the question or not whether there is a credible military threat or not, it has also an expiration date, and that is also something we need to take into account. Go ahead, Ms. Gissel.
Thank you, Jonathan, and thank you to my fellow panelists. It's been an honor to speak beside you. I would just like to highlight the significant danger that we all face in the West. Iran, Russia, China, they've been very clear about their ambitions, and they don't coincide with ours. And so, the nuclear program that we've been discussing, not just this morning, but say for the past 20, 30 years, has proceeded in one direction, and that is toward the development of a weapon to attack Israel, to cow Europe, and to create a strategic distraction and threaten the United States. The export of these weapons would be deeply dangerous. It would spark a nuclear proliferation across the Middle East and elsewhere. And I think the eyes of the world are not just upon Israel, but upon the United States to gauge the seriousness of our reaction, the seriousness of our alarm, and our response will not just inform what happens in Tehran, it will inform what happens in Moscow and what happens in Beijing. So I appreciated the insights and the comments this morning, and I think the next several weeks and months will be a very, very critical moment in our histories.
Absolutely. Ms. Gissel, Dr. Heinonen, Dr. Arad, and General Dr. Sofrin, thank you so much for all of your insights. I'd like to thank all of you at home as well. Until our next edition, from here in Jerusalem, wishing you a good day.